My name is Captain Claire Hartley. I'm 33 years old, and at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, I received a distress signal from a unit that had been declared dead 6 months ago. The voice on the signal was my sister's. I have been a signals intelligence officer for 11 years. I know what a ghost signal looks like. I know what equipment malfunction sounds like. I know the difference between interference and a human voice. That was a human voice. That was Sara. My sister had been listed as killed in action on September 14th. I had attended a memorial service. I had held my mother while she cried. I had folded a flag. And at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, her voice came through my equipment and said 4 words: "Claire, don't trust Webb." Then the signal cut out. I sat in that operations room for 90 seconds. Then I did something that changed everything. I did not report it. Let me tell you about Sara first. Sara Hartley was 29 years old when she was declared killed in action. She had been a combat medic for 7 years. She was the kind of soldier who remembered everyone's blood type and kept extra socks in her pack for the soldiers who forgot theirs. She was 2 years younger than me. She had followed me into the army the way she had followed me into everything since she was 5 years old. I spent 6 months believing she was dead. 6 months of her photograph on my desk, 6 months of Sunday phone calls I kept forgetting to stop making, 6 months of my mother setting a place at the table out of habit and then quietly removing it. And now, her voice, in my headset, at 2:47 a.m. 4 words: "Claire, don't trust Webb."
Captain Marcus Webb was my direct superior. He had been my commanding officer for 2 years. He was the person who had delivered the news of Sara's unit being declared lost. He had sat across from me in the same operations room and told me the search had been called off. He had looked me in the eye and said there was nothing more to be done. I had believed him. I had no reason not to believe him. Until 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. I need to tell you what I did in the 90 seconds after the signal cut out. I did not panic. I am a signals intelligence officer. Panic is not a tool I have access to. I did 3 things. First, I saved the signal, encrypted, on a personal device I kept separate from the base network. Not protocol, but I was not thinking about protocol. Second, I ran a trace on the signal's origin point. It came back to coordinates in a region I recognized immediately, the last known position of Sara's unit before they went dark. Third, I thought about the 4 words: "Claire, don't trust Webb." If Sara was alive, and the signal said she was alive, then someone had kept her alive for 6 months in a region that had been declared clear, in a location that had been searched, or that someone said was searched. Webb had overseen the search. Webb had called it off. I closed the trace. I powered down my station. I signed out for the night. And I went to find the one person on that base I was certain I could trust.
Her name was Sergeant Anna Reyes. She was 31 years old. She had been my operations specialist for 3 years. She was the person who knew every system on the base better than the people who designed them. She kept a photograph of her grandmother taped to her monitor and a backup drive in her left boot for situations exactly like this one. I knocked on her door at 3:15 a.m. She opened it immediately. She took one look at my face. She said, "What happened?" I said, "I need 48 hours and complete silence." She said, "Done. What do you need?" I said, "I need you to pull every signal log from the last 6 months originating from grid reference." I gave her the coordinates. She said, "That region was declared clear." I said, "I know." She said, "Webb signed off on the clearance." I said, "I know." She looked at me for 3 seconds. Then she stepped back and let me in. Anna worked for 6 hours straight. While she worked, I reviewed everything I could find on Sara's unit: Their last mission, their last confirmed communication, the timeline of the search, every report Webb had filed. The object that stopped me was a timestamp. Sara's unit had last been confirmed at 14:23 on September 14th. The search had been called off at 0900 on September 15th. 19 hours. I had been in this work for 11 years. Standard protocol for a unit gone dark in a hostile region was a minimum 72-hour search before any declaration was made. 19 hours was not even close. I pulled the authorization for the early termination, signed by Webb, approved by a senior officer whose name I recognized, a name that connected Webb to something much larger than a search and rescue decision. Anna found the first signal log at 6:30 a.m. She called me over to her screen without saying a word. She just pointed. There, 3 months after Sara's unit was declared dead, a signal, weak, intermittent, originating from the same coordinates. Then another, 2 weeks later. Then another. 7 signals in total over 6 months, all from the same location, all too weak to trigger automatic flagging in the system, but not too weak for a signals intelligence officer who was looking for them. Someone had been transmitting from that location for 6 months, and every transmission had been manually removed from the active monitoring queue. Manually removed by someone with senior system access. I looked at the access log. I looked at the name attached to the removals. I sat down. I want to pause here, because what I am about to tell you is the part that required me to make the most difficult decision of my 11-year career. If you have ever had to choose between following orders and following the truth, drop a comment below and subscribe right now, because what happened in the next 72 hours is the part that changed everything. The name on the access log was Webb's. Webb had been removing the signals manually for 6 months. Every time a transmission came through from those coordinates, Webb had cleared it from the queue before it could be analyzed. He had known. For 6 months, he had known there were signals coming from a region he had declared clear, from coordinates where a unit he had declared dead might still be alive, and he had hidden it. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called the one number I had memorized for a situation I had hoped would never happen, the Inspector General's office. Not Webb's superior, not anyone in our chain of command. The one body that existed specifically to investigate situations where the chain of command itself was the problem. The IG officer who answered was Colonel Patricia Morrison. She had been in military law for 22 years. Her voice at 7:15 in the morning was as steady as if I had called at noon. I told her everything. The signal, Sara's voice, the 4 words, Anna's logs, the 19-hour search, Webb's access log, the 7 removed transmissions. I spoke for 11 minutes without stopping. When she finished, Morrison said 3 words, "Don't move yet." She said, "I am sending 2 officers to your location within 4 hours. You and Sergeant Reyes are not to access any base systems until they arrive. You are not to speak to Webb or anyone in your command chain." She said, "Do you understand?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Captain Hartley, the coordinates from the signal, I need them now." I gave them to her. She said, "We will handle the rest." She hung up. I looked at Anna. Anna looked at me. She said, "Is Sara alive?" I said, "I don't know yet." I said, "But someone is going to find out." Morrison's team arrived in 3 hours and 40 minutes. 2 officers, civilian clothes. They moved through the base quietly. They did not announce themselves. They went directly to the signals operations room, with equipment I had not seen before. They worked for 6 hours. At 4 p.m., one of them came to find me. She said, "Colonel Morrison would like to speak with you." Morrison's voice on the secure line was different from the early morning call, still steady, but something else in it. She said,
"Captain, the coordinates have been accessed by a recovery team." I said, "And?" She said, "The location was occupied. A small facility, underground, hidden from aerial surveillance." My hands were not steady. I want to be honest about that. My hands were not steady at all. I said, "How many survivors?" She said, "4, all from Sara's unit." I said, "Is Sara Hartley among them?" A pause of 2 seconds. Morrison said, "Yes." I am not going to describe the phone call I made to my mother. Some things are not mine to put into words for an audience. What I will tell you is that my mother had not removed Sara's place setting from the table, not once in 6 months. She had set it every day, every meal. She did not explain why. She did not need to.
Webb was arrested on base 4 hours after Morrison's team completed their work. The charges were serious: obstruction, falsification of military records, deliberate suppression of distress signals from active personnel, conduct unbecoming an officer. The investigation that followed took 7 months. I testified 3 times, Anna testified twice. The 7 removed signal logs were the foundation of the case. Webb's defense argued technical malfunction, that the removals were automated, that he had not known the signals were live. The access logs showed his personal credentials used each time. His defense did not survive contact with the evidence. Webb was convicted on all counts. He is serving 9 years. The senior officer whose name appeared on the search termination authorization was also investigated. That case is still ongoing. I cannot say more.
Sara was in a military hospital for 6 weeks after recovery. Physical injuries, malnutrition, the specific damage that 6 months in a hidden facility produces in a human body. She recovered. She is stubborn in the way that people who follow their older sisters into the army tend to be stubborn, and worse. That is Sara. On the day she was discharged, I drove her to our mother's house. Our mother was standing at the door before we pulled into the driveway. She had set a place at the table that morning. She had been setting it for 6 months. She had known. The 4 words Sara transmitted that night. "Claire, don't trust Webb." She had been trying to reach me for 6 months. 7 transmissions, all removed before they could be analyzed. She had no way of knowing if any of them got through, but she kept transmitting, because she knew that if one signal reached me, I would not stop until I found her. She knew that because I am her older sister, and older sisters do not stop. Here's what 6 months of believing my sister was dead and 90 seconds of her voice at 2:47 a.m. taught me. When something tells you to look closer, look. When a timestamp does not add up, ask why. When a signal comes through that everyone else has missed, do not dismiss it because it is inconvenient or impossible or outside what you expected to find. The most important information rarely arrives at a convenient time in a convenient format. It arrives at 2:47 a.m. in 4 words from a voice you have spent 6 months grieving. And when it does, you save it, you trace it, you call the right person, and you do not stop until you find her. That is my story. 11 years of service, 90 seconds that changed everything, and a place setting that was never removed from the table. Drop a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one. And subscribe. I am here every week with a new story. Same ending every time. She stayed calm, she stayed quiet, then she won.